Yes, it's a new year, but it's the same old story, and that is inflation. How bad will it get, and how can you protect yourself? Hi everyone, I'm David Scranton, and thank you for clicking on today's video. As we enter 2022, inflation remains a major concern for both consumers and investors. And beyond that, the current inflation spike also has many older Americans worried about its impact on their retirement plans. In a way, that's good. Why? Because inflation should be a major concern when it comes to retirement planning. I'll tell you why on today's show and share some tips on how to inflation-proof your retirement. Specifically, we'll cover why inflation is such a big concern again for older workers and retirees, some scary facts about inflation and retirement, ways to inflation-proof your retirement plan, and how investing for income helps. Now, if you're looking for even more retirement tips, subscribe to our Retirement Income Store newsletter. We're offering our loyal income generation viewers a complimentary 12-month trial subscription to the newsletter. All you have to do is click the link in the description. Now, let's talk inflation. While all Americans are feeling the effects of inflation, if you happen to be over the age of 50, you might just be more worried about it for a couple of reasons. One, you're old enough to remember the double-digit inflation rates of the 1970s. And you know that as bad as inflation is now, it can get a lot worse. And two is that you're either retired or getting close to retirement age. So you know on some level that the eroding effect of inflation and what it can do to your retirement nest egg over the long run. According to a survey late last year, 71% of investors between age 59 and 75 believe that rising inflation will negatively affect their retirement savings. Moreover, 46% of investors said that they believe rising inflation and low interest rates will make it more difficult to have steady income in retirement. Again, this increased awareness might just be a silver lining in today's dark cloud of inflation. Why? Because underestimating the effects of inflation can be one of the most common and costly retirement mistakes. Why is it so costly? Well, consider for a moment the impact that even an average inflation rate of about 3% could do to your finances over the next 20 years. Let's say you need $60,000 a year for your first year of retirement. In 20 years, you'd require $108,000 to match today's purchasing power of $60,000. And that's scary enough. What makes it even scarier is that people are living longer now than ever before. So with today's longevity rates, you may need to plan for up to 30 years of retirement income, not just 20. Now, things get even scarier when you factor in healthcare inflation. Since 1948, the cost of medical care has grown at an average annual rate of 5.3% per year, compared to this 3.5% CPI average annual increase. And Social Security isn't keeping up even to the CPI. The Senior Citizens League estimates that the average Social Security benefit has lost almost a third of its buying power since the year 2000. Why? Because the cost of living adjustment, or the COLA, those increases have not kept up with rising costs. In some years, the COLA has been non-existent or nearly so. Although the 2021 COLA was set at 5.9%, be aware that even a good benefit increase is often undercut by increased premiums for Medicare Part B. For 2022, Medicare Part B premiums are set to rise by 14.5%, which is one of the biggest jumps in the program's entire history. While there's no way to escape inflation, yes, you can take steps to minimize its impact on your retirement. First, maximize your savings and minimize your debt, obviously. Second, identify or modify, if necessary, your retirement goals. You see, inflation means that you may want to change your timetable on some of your goals or make financial moves now that can better help you achieve them. Third, hate to say this, but you have to keep an eye these days on the Federal Reserve, because how the Fed does or doesn't respond to inflation can be one of the biggest factors in determining how it might affect the financial markets overall. And fourth, maximize your Social Security. Even though your benefits probably won't keep up with inflation, maximizing them is still one of the most important keys to inflation-proofing your retirement plan and achieving your goals. Fifth, consider the cost of long-term care, which is really a separate challenge unto itself. Insurance and Medicare coverage for long-term care is limited, and statistically, about 70% of Americans that make it past age 65 will need some form of long-term care before they die. And sixth, please make sure your financial strategy is flexible enough for you to both anticipate and to respond to the potential impacts of inflation. Here's the good news. All of these inflation-proofing steps, along with many others, are central to the income model. Income specialists can use a variety of techniques that help you keep pace with inflation and even stay ahead of inflation. In addition, many income-based options, including I-bonds, some annuities, dividend-paying stocks, actually offer some built-in inflation protection. And what's more, an income specialist can often help you engineer your inflation hedge through the strategic reinvestment of interest and dividends that you don't need for income. And beyond that, the income model accounts for today's longer lifespans. And it also helps give you a strategy that's inflation-proofed, not just for 10 or 20 years, but for 30 years or more. Now it's time to bring in today's guests. Of course, we have my good friend Jeff Small, president of Arbor Financial Services, a retirement income store located in Melbourne, Florida. And his claim to fame is he caught 4 swordfish this weekend. Isn't that true, Jeff?
That is very true, Dave. Next time you're coming with us.
I love it. I love it. But we also have one of my and Jeff's favorite special guests, and that's Steve Forbes, editor-in-chief of Forbes magazine. Steve, thanks so much for being back with us here on The Income Generation.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Steve, we're living in the time of financial fiction. With all of the Fed stimulus from the COVID event in March of 2020, it's caused rapid amounts of inflation. And then when you combine that with the cost of energy more than doubling in as little as 9 months since President Biden was elected, the American people are slammed with inflationary issues. And now the Fed wants to raise rates. Give us your take.
Well, what we have here is what happens when the government gets involved in the economy, trying to help us and end up hurting us. It was one thing to provide people money, insurance money, disaster relief after COVID hit in early 2020. But they continued those policies of printing a lot of money well past when the worst was over for the economy going into 2021. As you know, President Biden has passed 2 bills totaling over $3 trillion. One so-called infrastructure bill, which only provided $100 billion for what we consider infrastructure, like roads and bridges and the like. And so you print all that money, plus you don't turn on the economy like a light switch. They didn't realize, government officials didn't realize, Jeff, that the economy each day involves literally around the world hundreds of millions of buy and sell decisions. So you have these intricate, widespread supply chains. They're disrupted. You can't put those back together very easily. It takes time. Plus, you have countries responding to COVID in different ways, which means there's no synchronization. So you've got shortages because of the disruption of supply chains. Unfortunately, this administration's made it worse. It's made it worse by waging war against energy and other things that hurt the economy. And now we have on the horizon the Federal Reserve. Are they going to be releasing hundreds of billions of dollars, cheapening the dollar in 2022 and 2023?
Sure, of course. Steve, I know you're not an economist per se, but what would you say, if you had to take a guess, how much of this inflation problem right here is from the increased demand versus how much is from the reduced supply of goods and services, i.e. the supply chain issues?
Well, it's both. You have a lot of cash in the economy overall, both for corporations and for individuals overall. And with these supply chain disruptions, you have less supply. So more cash, less supply. Guess what happens? Prices go up. And these things would cure themselves if the government would let it. But this administration just seems to want to make the situation worse, not better, all in the name of helping us. Not.
What can the government do to help the supply chain? If you were sitting in the seat right now and you did run for president in years past, right? What do you think they could do to help this supply chain issue better than they're doing right now?
Well, for one thing, stop waging war against energy. Don't stop putting in regulations, going after scapegoating, trying to scapegoat meat processors and the like in the energy industry. Back off from that and stop putting in new regulations, which is going to be hurting the formation of new businesses, small new businesses. So step back, get rid of this crazy vaccination requirement, which is taking people out of the workforce, not recognizing that you can get immunity from having had the disease is often better than the shots themselves, as we're discovering. So back off on that kind of thing. And the Federal Reserve, stop the bond buying, stop the money printing, and start reducing your bloated portfolio and make sure the dollar has integrity. And in the 12 months, this thing would work its way out.
Steve, the Fed is loopy. What are they doing over there? First, they ruined the Santa Claus rally by announcing the ending of the stimulus in March. And just recently now, they're talking about doing a fourth interest rate increase projected for 2022. I think they're out to lunch. I don't think they can raise rates. We're going to have a huge negative reverberating effect in the markets and the economy if they do that. Do you agree?
Well, what the Fed is telling us is that they're going to stop buying bonds. As you know, they've been buying bonds at the rate of $120 billion a month, including $80 billion of Treasury bonds. They say they're going to stop that in March or April, which leads to a very interesting question, Jeff. Who is going to buy the government debt? As you know, the government has a deficit of about $1.5–2 trillion a year. About half of that, more than that, has been bought by the Federal Reserve. The Fed's not buying bonds anymore. Who's going to finance that debt? And what that means is long-term interest rates are going to go up more than the Fed anticipates. You're already starting to see that in the mortgage market and the 10-year bond yield. And in terms of printing money, in the past year, the Fed has printed almost $2 trillion of new money. It has dammed that up through a gimmick called reverse repurchase agreements, where they put the money in the banking system and then borrow it back overnight. Early in 2020, they had zero of that kind of a gimmickry. Now it's over $1.7 trillion. Are they going to be able to keep that money from flooding the economy? I'm not so sure. And in terms of interest rates, what the Fed should do is just back off. Interest rate controls are like the rent controls, price controls. Let borrowers and lenders determine what is the cost of money going to be instead of bureaucrats in Washington. Bureaucrats, even if they call themselves central bankers, they're still trying to control the economy. Stop it.
Yeah. Steve, in theory, I agree. I know Jeff agrees with you, but we all know that's not going to happen at the Federal Reserve. So real world, do you think any tightening that they do right now is going to cause the next recession? Or do you think they can have some success in actually staving off inflation without pushing us in that bad direction?
Well, unfortunately, the Federal Reserve believes that prosperity causes inflation. Yeah. And so the only way they know how to fight inflation is by slowing the economy down, right. Which is nonsense. If you let the economy alone, it sorts these things out itself, and we can move on and have genuine sustainable prosperity. But the Fed believes that if you want lower inflation, you have to have higher unemployment. It's called the Phillips curve, named after a New Zealand economist back in the 1950s. And if you want lower inflation, you have to have higher unemployment. If you want lower unemployment, you have to have higher inflation. It's nonsense. Real world experience shows, as you indicated, that's nonsense. So the problem with inflation is the Fed does not know how to fight it. The way you fight it is keep the value of the dollar steady, stop the printing of excess money, and let the American people do the rest.
So real world, you mentioned. To finish up for today, real world, what is the average investor who's at or near retirement to do if he or she needs income, but also needs to have an inflation hedge, especially in these times?
Well, outside of your retirement money, and if you're not near retirement, just ride the market through, have a cash reserve. But in terms of your non-retirement money, You go for, I think, stocks that have a history of dividends, being able to generate income, which you don't get from bonds these days. And as for the hedge, I would have some gold, maybe 5 or 10%, not as an investment, but as a hedge against bad policy by the Federal Reserve. It's an insurance policy. And so it's like near cash. And so it's been about $1,800 an ounce now. I think if the Fed messes up, it's going to go up in dollar price. Gold always keeps its intrinsic value. And see the price change, that's changing. That reflects the change in the value of the dollar, not gold.
Sure. Well, Steve, thank you very much. Jeff, thank you. We're out of time, but as usual, it's great having you both here.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you for watching today's video on how to inflation-proof your retirement. If you enjoyed it, click the thumbs up button to give us a like, and make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel for new content each and every week.